Well, hi, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Richard Parker. I'm a regional historian here with focus on a lot of different Paducah stories and Western Kentucky stories. I've researched everything from Paducah's former bourbon trade all the way up to baseball. Believe it or not, the co-founder of the World Series, Barney Dreyfuss, the first place he lived when he came from Germany was Paducah, Kentucky for 8 years. Really interesting story I've been working on. But it all ties back to our little river town during the Victorian era, the 1880s, 1890s. Paducah was a very wealthy city, and all that came from the Ohio River. So I'm going to be talking about a little bit today about pottery and how this plays into a bigger story. This kind of birthed out of a Paducah Life article I wrote with them called Paducah's Place at the Table. And we'll get into that and what that actually means. But at first, I would like to thank Bobby. Bobby's been doing this. I didn't want to age her, but I'm going to. She was the founder of Evening Upstairs, and this is my third time, but my first real time in person. I did a couple of these during the COVID years, so I'm excited to be here with real people in front of me to talk to. I also want to thank Mike Kelly. Mike emailed me. He saw this somehow. And he had a question about the top on this one churn over there, or crock, and I was like, I have no clue. I'm not a pottery person. I'm just a historian. But turns out he is a pottery person. So once we're done, please go visit with Mike Kelly over there, who was nice enough to bring in his collection to show, because I'm a poor historian, and these things aren't cheap. But they are very cool. Also, I want to thank Jack Johnson. Jack actually brought me, he's kind of Paducah's collector of all things and historian. And he brought me a really cool detailed map of the pottery works, Paducah pottery, which I hadn't seen yet. So I'm excited about that. That's not going to be in the presentation. And then this is really cool. I hadn't seen this one, but this is an actual, what would have been one of the magazines to see all the different types that the company made once they were out in LA. So thanks, Jack and Mike. All right, so let's get started. So our story starts, as many of our stories do, here in Paducah, in Louisville. But I first wanted to start with this quote here I thought was pretty neat. It says, the most important pottery of the Purchase, and that's the Purchase area, considering the extent of the factory and the modern methods of manufacture, is Paducah pottery. And I think this is saying a lot about our location and where we're at, and why it was so important to the success of Mr. Bauer's line of pottery. All right, so this is Louisville here, 1718, and this is where J. Andy is his name. That is what he goes by, and he's a German immigrant straight to Louisville to help work with his brother's pottery shop. So his brother, there's a later picture of him that I got from the McCracken County Library, the digital collections. Highly encourage you all to check that out, a lot of the stuff. I'll note where I got it at, their collection. But that's later in life here in Paducah. When he came back to visit, they had a picture of him. But Mr. Andy worked for his brother John at the Preston Street Pottery. And Preston Street Pottery was kind of like the utilitarian crock maker. Mr. Kelly said it best as, think of modern day Tupperware. They made it all for stuff to store stuff. You can really get into some intriguing stuff of yesteryear, how things were produced. But at the heart of it was a lot of these different stonewares. So he learned the skills necessary there to become an expert potter. His brother already had a pretty major operation that I read that ran all the way down south, all the way up north into Pennsylvania. So they were producing pottery and shipping it out for people. But as a lot of our Paducah entrepreneurs, they always wanted to do their own thing. And so he found Paducah Pottery here in Paducah, and it was a very large, small-scale pottery, but he struck out on his own and came down the river via the steamboat to Paducah to buy Paducah Pottery and set up his shop. So by then it was, and there's a picture of his brother. It was kind of hard to get this when I got it from a scan, But he was much older than Andy. And like I said, he was already well into the business, and that was very much so where Andy got the expertise of not only being a potter, but being a businessman. And that's really how success came when he came to Paducah, how he was quickly able to start a business. So Paducah Pottery at the time was owned by, Frank Parham, and it was operated at 1618 through 622 Trimble and 7th Street. So Trimble and 7th Street, 7th Street's still there, but Trimble is Park. So literally we pass this every day as we're coming down. If you know where the AC company's at, I can't think the name of it. But as you keep going through, it's right there on, now it's like a metal smithing place. But if you drive down 7th, you'll see there's no longer any old buildings there. They've all been torn down. But this would have been the location of it. You can see the different, so Sanborn maps, this is insurance maps. And so how they used to sell insurance back in the day is this company called Sanborn would come ever so often, every few years, to cities, and they would literally map out these businesses. And so let's say you're an insurance agent out in Kansas City, New York City, wherever, you could pull up that city's Sanborn map and figure out how much you're going to charge them for their policy, because it would show all the hazards that the business has. So for historians, this is an absolute gold mine. This tells us where stuff's located. It tells us how big the operation was. And so I really love these things. But you can see there all the different types of kilns and where they were located at. He quickly came here, and he was single, but he went back to Louisville and actually met his wife there, Emma. And this is an actual written into the Kentucky marriage license thing about their union. But they came here back to Paducah to start a family. And that's a lot of the people that I've studied here in Paducah. It's a very interesting thing, because these people lay down these really deep roots here, but then they have to make a decision. Do I stay here and stay with the success that I have, or do I get up and leave? And so that was very much the same for J. Andy. So this is another warehouse here. So this would have been diagonal from the actual factory itself. And does this thing have a laser? No. Okay, it doesn't. So I'll point here. So 621, that is his actual residence. So literally J. Andy is looking out catty corner to his operation, but then to the left of his front porch would have been the warehouse where they would have stored all this before shipping. And as you can tell, if you're familiar with this is Park. Right when you hit the railroads, about 2 minutes after that's where the warehouse starts. And so this was all strategic. This was pretty much, we know now as Paducah's industry is way out past the mall. Back in the day, it was in that area, what is now Park. This is where all the Paducah Brewery Works was at there. All the different liquor stores, we were talking about that earlier. Yeah, so these are huge ones, but the smaller ones that would have been used for whiskey jugs, if you got a 1 gallon jug full of whiskey, you're carrying it around alone, they get heavy. So they would ship the bourbon from up there in what I call central Kentucky, Bardstown area, down the river to Paducah, and then you could go into a saloon to get your jug filled up. And I'll show you some more examples of that. So yeah, so that's kind of the heart, just put you all into perspective there of Park, Martin Luther, King Jr., and then of course those railroad tracks are still there, but that was the industrious part of Paducah at the time, and Bauer chose to be there. So this is his family here. So living there on Trimble Avenue, 621 Trimble Avenue. He eventually had 4 daughters named Katie, Evan, Mamie, and Tilly, and 1 son, Edwin. And so this picture here, one of the daughters is missing, I think. Or maybe there's, yeah. And so, one of the stories that I always try to tie this to is like these entrepreneurs would find success, but at the same time, they would still have this love of their community and where they're at. But during this time, Paducah Pottery mainly focused on cider jugs, churns, crocks, jars, pickling, shallow pans, vinegar jugs, and whiskey jugs. And so just a couple things there. The vinegar jugs, that was big business here. If anyone remembers Friedman, Joseph Friedman, ended up multi-millionaire back in the day, but he nearly gave it all away. But when he first came to Paducah, he started a vinegar business. And a lot of these early Bauer jugs were vinegar jugs, and you can still find them on eBay. And they're literally, it's like they scratched that name, Friedman Vinegar Company, in the side of it, which is a pretty neat thing. All right, so this is some of the early examples of the 19th century examples here that I found at different auction sites that were kind of going back to those kind of early ones. Of course, we got Mike here, who could probably tell you all more. I think he said that most of his jugs here are from 1890s. I know that these 4 here are Paducah-made jugs, and then this is a Louisville jug, which I'll tell you about here in a few minutes. So let's talk about Paducah Tile Company. So Paducah Tile Company was actually a part of the Pottery Company, and I meant to bring in, I have a reproduction of the same book that Jack brought in. That is the actual Paducah Tile book you could flip through. But when he got here, he needed to expand the line some, so they started making tile as well. And this is the footsteps here of the Irving Cobb. Later on, they would sell the company, but it would continue practically in the same vein. And this is some of the 1890s Victorian tile. And if you own an old house here, being around Paducah, you've seen the Paducah tile. It's pretty well known. I looked at this fixer-upper about 2 weeks ago, and it was total loss, unfortunately. But I was looking down, I was like, oh, that's a piece of Paducah tile. And like, sure enough, picked it up and looked on the back, and it's what it was. So a lot of homes here had that, but that was also exported out throughout the network. And keep that in mind, like the Ohio Valley, Paducah was so successful because of our locations on the Tennessee, the Cumberland, and the Ohio. Of course, there's the Mississippi, but more of those major networks are on upriver. And so a lot of these people had great success all the way up to Pennsylvania, all throughout the Ohio Valley. So here's some more of those 1900s examples, maybe some of the 1890s. I put on to show you guys the maker mark stamps on those. This is like one of the best examples that I've seen in pictures of that one. But when we're done, please come up and visit that. Mike and I was joking earlier. I was like, yeah, I was about halfway through this presentation when I realized those numbers on the jugs correlated to how big they were. And I was like, he's like, people ask me that all the time. And I just kind of thought it was common sense. And I was like, sure you did. But yeah, so if you see the different numbers on them, that tells you how much they could hold. And again, going back to what Mike said about it being Tupperware, exactly. All right, so the big growth that happens with the company comes when they start to expand in 1903 to 08. And this is where they start focusing more on different products. So you can think, Stanley. Stanley blew up. Stanley's always been around. But, they started focusing on some different types of products to get to a newer generation, to a different, demographic. And that's exactly what happened. And that's what a lot of these companies would do. So at this time, Bauer moved into beer growlers, coolers, drugs for that, for medicine, jars, measures, mugs, and whatever nippies is. But more of those kind of daily products that you would use in the course of life. But it grew immensely. They had four kilns, with 60 employees, and they grew to 6 kilns with about 100 employees. And so what really helped him out, though, and when I was researching this, I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I grew up in Paris, Tennessee, down by H.C. Spink's clay company, and literally they told us growing up that most of the clay, or most of the toilets in America comes from Henry County clay, and I always thought that was really funny, but it's true. It's ball clay, very easy to mine. They hardly have to do anything to get it. And so one of the success of J. Andy's operation is the clay. And so I found this map here. This is from the University of Kentucky, showing the different clay mines that would have been from the 1890s all the way up to the 1920s. And they have just a little bit of information about it. But it actually lists that the Bauer mine was right in that area, right there in Bowles, Kentucky, in Graves County. But they also had mines in Lone Oak and one down Mayfield Road. And this would give him a huge leg up on his competition because a lot of other potters were importing their clay from just various places all around the United States, and some even from England. In the pottery community at the time, if you wanted to have a superior product, you would have clay imported from England. But Bauer simply just went down the road, one county down, got the ball clay, Kentucky ball clay, and used it in his operations. And so that kind of tells you the mindset of him and his company and their success. So we got all this cool stuff. You can come up here and look at this, see some more examples. But really where he hits his money at is these little things. Mini advertising jugs. And so when I was researching this, one of the antiques collectors said that most of the mini jugs he saw, about 90% of them were from Louisville or Paducah, from the Bauer brothers. And so that's one thing we'll kind of get to it here in a second, but the operation in Louisville continued, and the one in Paducah. Simultaneously, I'm sure they worked together. The mini jugs from Louisville, identical. But this would take an interesting turn here in Paducah too, and that's where we're going to go on a side quest here in a second. But eventually with his business success, he also became an important community member. And so this was one of the things, quotes I found here in the Paducah Sun about him that I just wanted to throw up there for you all to read. And again, this is a later photo that I got from the McCracken County Digital Libraries when he came back to visit some old friends here. But he's very community-minded. He served on the local school board for 6 years. He was also an Odd Fellows member. If you're familiar with that, that was kind of simultaneously ran with the Masonic lodges. And he was a Mason too. But he was also very active in the Democratic Party here in McCracken County. So very community-minded. There was some stuff I found during after a couple of the floods that he would help pass out food for people. But yeah, so even though he found wealth, he was still there to share that with the community. All right, so like a lot of other wealthy families here in Paducah, they love to vacation. And one of the big places that a lot of people here that I've studied was California. And so he would take his family to Los Angeles, Long Beach area for weeks on end, sometimes months. They would spend the whole summer. And that was to help alleviate his asthmatic condition, especially during the spring and in the early summer months. They would go to LA to enjoy the stable weather. And so it wasn't too long until he decided, hey, I can't live in the pollen bow back in Kentucky anymore. It's time for me to pull the trigger and move. And so that's exactly what he did. In 1909, this is the one from the Story of Paducah, a sketch of Paducah pottery, and you can see all the different advertisements here that would have been. But he made the decision, again, a tough decision. I'm about to talk about another person who made that same decision to leave to go on to greater things. But he ends up leaving Paducah here, and he makes the move to 415 to 421 West Avenue in Los Angeles. Now, during this time, he's fortunate. A lot of his people moved with him. A lot of the people working for him, the newspapers talks about, they just got up and they went with him. It was a job, it was a new adventure. And he took all his molds, everything that he had that he could take, and he shipped it out west. And so that's where he lands at. And this is a later photo during the 20s of it, but that is the original building that they go into. And let me see here. And so basically he was looking for a new consumer base, also trying to solve his asthmatic condition. But on top of that, this was a restart. He still had his loyal clients back east. And I always like when I do tours and stuff, especially walking tours, is to talk about technology and the importance of it. So during this time, we have the rails. The rails are the fastest way to travel. You can ship goods. And so he knows that he can still produce this and get this back east to his customers. It may just take a little bit longer, but he can still have a new customer base out west as well. But it wasn't long until he, let's see, I got lost here for a second. Oh, sorry. But he continues with this, and we'll get into more of the specifics of his quest or his company in California here in a second. But so what happens to the Paducah Towel Company? So he does take that, he sells that to a man named F.K. Pence, who runs it all the way up until the 1940s. And everything I found says it's still that same Trimble and 7th Street location. But at age 66, Andy retires, and he sells 2/3 of his interests of the pottery customer to one of his favorite customers, prominent Paducah expat Bernard Bernheim. And so I've studied the Bernheim brothers all up and down whichever way, and that's kind of how I stumbled across this connection. So now we're going to go on a side quest, okay? Oh, yeah, there's the company. I forgot to click on that, but there's the new logo that they come up for the California brand. Oh, yeah, here's some examples of them, too. Sorry. Yeah, all right. So Bernard Bernheim. So our story really starts with two brothers again, and bourbon. And so Bernard is the younger brother of Isaac Wolf Bernheim. So Isaac comes as a young 19-year-old to America with the promise of a job in New York City, working in the cotton industry, making fabric, yarn. But as he's taken the month-and-a-half long journey from Germany over, the cotton markets absolutely crash. And so by the time he gets here, his uncle's bankrupt, and he's on his way back to Paducah. And so, Isaac is out of a job. So he decides to make the best of a bad situation, and he starts peddling. Now, a peddler is, I always say, think of modern Amazon. They go into the city, they buy goods, they load it up on their horse and buggy, and they go out to the countryside to sell these goods at, inflated pricing, but hey, they're coming straight to your door. And so he's out peddling throughout Pennsylvania, when his uncle comes back here to Paducah and writes to him and says, hey, I got a job if you want it. And he's like, no, I kind of like doing my own thing. I'm learning about America, right here in front of me, learning the language and all that. And so he turns him down. Well, after a couple months, peddling gets really hard because his horse dies. And so he makes the decision to immediately hit up his uncle to come to Paducah. And so in 1867, he comes to Paducah, and this is what he says. He says in his autobiography, I was on my way to Paducah, richer in experience, but poorer in purse when I had landed in the previous year. And so eventually what happens is he comes here to Paducah, and he starts working for his uncle Mangold Livingston at the Cohen's shop. And so it didn't actually look like that at the time. This was a later remodel of it, but it is the location. And so he was selling goods there, organizing the shop, when he basically stumbles into two guys named Loeb and Bloom. And these are the last name of two of Paducah's only wholesalers of bourbon. And they see the young Bernard, or the young Bernheim, and was essentially like, hey, we need you. Come work for us. We need you to do accounting. We need you to organize our stuff. And so they agree to a really hefty salary for a young 20-year-old. So he goes, works to them, and eventually he gets his chance to start selling whiskey as a traveling salesman. That's where the money was at. Think about like a really good, successful used car salesman today. And so he gets his chance when one of the other salesmen inherits a bunch of money, leaves his wife, leaves his kids behind, and just disappears into the dark. And so Loeb and Bloom go up to Bernard, or to Isaac, and basically, hey, here's your shot, go. So he becomes the salesman for the saloons in Tennessee. But that leaves a vacancy, and that's when he reaches out to his younger brother, Bernard, who is 19 at the time, to come take his place. So now once the brothers get here, they're scheming. That's what it's back in the day. You're a young immigrant. You're looking for a way to make your money. You've heard America is the place to come. And so they start saving up their money. And within a few years, they actually amass $1,200, which doesn't sound like a lot now. But back, if we adjust that for inflation, that's around $50,000 that they're able to save up with the two working, cutting expenses. So they approach Loeb and Bloom and ask them for a cut in the business. And basically, the Loeb and Bloom brushed them off, saying, you guys are too young. You know, what's $1,200 to us? That's nothing. That's not even a sizable investment. Like, just keep working for us, keep saving your money up, come back to us when you got something substantial. But they had already secured financing with a man named Elbridge Palmer. And Elbridge Palmer was the financier of Paducah during this time. If you've heard of the Palmer Hotel, well, he paid for it. And it was named after him because he paid for it. But this is actually an agreement here that the library here owns to that loan, to the actual loan that Elbridge Palmer gives the Bernheim brothers to get into business. And so with that, they're able to secure financing. The actual location is one of the Market House theaters. It's the one nearly right beside Kirchhoff's. It's a couple on down, right where the old Flamingo Row used to be at, if you remember those days. And that's what they do. They bring bourbon in from central Kentucky, they store it, and then they ship it out to the saloons. And then back in the day, you would simply go to a saloon. They'd have one brand of whiskey on tap, and you ask, do you want a bourbon, rye, regular whiskey? What do you want, proof? And they would just fill up your jug. And that's how people would get those whiskey jugs take home. Well, they become extremely successful in this. Here's an example of their I.W. Harper brand. But see, it all comes back together, okay? They're sourcing their little mini whiskey jugs that they would send out to people to try their product straight from Paducah Pottery, or the one in our Louisville Pottery there too. And so this would actually really take a turn in 1885 when they win the gold medal at the World's Fair. And they're still here in Paducah. They bring that back from New Orleans. And you can still go to the liquor store today and pick up an I.W. Harper. And the biggest medal in the center is the Paducah one. A really cool little tie to us. All right, so they got that connection. This is another thing I got from Nathan here at the library of showing some of their various locations. But they did extremely well. One of the big things is that every year they were able to keep going. Even through the panic of 1873, they were able to keep going. But they knew that eventually they would hit a dead end. Oh, we're not there yet. And so they made the tough decision, just like J. Andy Bauer did. They had to move. And so they made the tough decision in 1888 to move to Louisville. Bernard already has a family. Isaac has a family. Isaac had been here for 20 years, and Bernard had been here for 18. Very integral part of the community. Both lived on Jefferson Street in these really nice Victorian mansions. And they uprooted and they left because of the logistical challenges that Paducah presented over what Louisville could offer. And so they go to Louisville. They build one of the world's state-of-the-art distilleries, which is now, it's still in production. Heaven Hill uses it. But they get hit by Prohibition. If you know anything about Prohibition, Kentucky actually voted Prohibition to go dry 1 month before national Prohibition. This is a lot of things that people don't realize. A lot of the states, in Tennessee, I think it's 1916, they voted in Prohibition 3 years before national Prohibition. So a lot of the southern states voted it in before actual national Prohibition. And there's literally stories of workers going into Bardstown and like didn't even know that they had passed this in Frankfort, and there's a sign on the door that said, hey, go back home. We don't know when you're going to be back. But for the Bernheim brothers, they become lucky because they're one of 5 in the nation that gets a medicinal whiskey license to make it. Now, if you guys remember, I hate talking about it, but if you remember from COVID, there's one store that never closed. It was the liquor store. Too many people are dependent on alcohol and can actually die if they don't have it. And so this was very much what set the brothers up. So you can look here, this is an actual example of you would go to the doctor, say, hey doc, my head hurts, my belly's all messed up, what can you give me? And the doc would literally write you a prescription for whiskey. And they all came in these little pint jugs there. And you would go to the pharmacy would fill it. They would pull off a pint off the shelf, put the RX label on the back of it and say, hey, here you go, here's your medicine. And so that's a lot of why CVS and not Rite Aid, because I think they're done, Walgreens still sell liquor. It was a part of what they did. But if you're here with me, they make a lot of money. Okay, they never actually turn off, and we'll jump back here to pottery in a second. But that allows them to invest in a lot of different businesses. And I'm going to wrap up I.W. Harper and the Bernard or Bernheim brothers. But at the end of the day, they're the first to export bourbon all around the world. Actually, the I.W. Harper brand kind of dies in the 50s and 60s, but the Japanese love it. Their top shelf, 23-year-old, I.W. Harper is their go-to. And they only make, the company now only makes a special blend just for Japanese customers. You can't even get here in the United States, even though we produce it. So that takes us back to our pottery story. And so during Prohibition, there's a big kind of, I'm missing my slides. All right, so basically back during Prohibition, J. Andy retires. And so the company's kind of left up to this disarray. And so that's when Bernard Bernheim steps in with all his bourbon money. And if you've ever heard the term bourbon baron, that's him. He has one of the huge mansions down on 3rd Street and down Old Louisville that's still in existence today. But he wants to help set his daughter and her husband, Watson Brockman, and his daughter's name, Ava, up with a company. So he agrees to purchase a third of the Bauer Pottery Company for $20,000. And so adjusted for inflation, that's about $370,000. So a pretty substantial investment. But the family would still oversee the larger portion of the factory, including J. Andy into his soft retirement. But unfortunately, in October 1923, he passed away in his sleep. And this kind of creates some kind of, who's going to take charge. And so actually Brockman steps in to serve as vice president, and Bernard's son, Lynn Bernheim, as vice president. But in 1927, their partnership falls apart, and they have a massive reorganization. And this is where Lynn Bernheim really puts his on the mark of J.A. Bauer Pottery when he becomes president, and he kind of pushes out the family, and he starts focusing on it as a businessman. And at this point, he's still running. He's the man in charge of the Bernheim brothers whiskey empire. And so he goes in here, and he really wants to change the image of the company from this crudeness, because this is old school. If you guys remember those Pyrex pots that, well, I guess some of you all may have owned some of those in the 80s, but I remember as a kid and being like, oh, like that green, brown pattern on the side of them. You know, that's grandma's dishes. And so at this time, this was grandma's Tupperware. And so he really wants to improve it. And so he brings into production the first line of brightly colored earthenware. And this is a big shift because this was a shift from where dining ware was mainly during this time porcelain, and it's a shift to it being pottery. And this really leads the charge into where we're at today. And so this is, you know, where do you get this inspiration at? Lynn Bernheim lived here in Paducah, definitely knew. This is our Paducah CVB here. I had some of the folks there take these pictures for me. But we have these bright colored tiles from Paducah Tile all throughout Paducah. And, you know, maybe as a kid he remembered some of these when he was visiting his friend the Bauers. You know, who knows? But they come out with this new example of homeware. And as you can tell here, the first ones are very kind of rich in color, very deep, these dark blues, this dark kind of brown. I've seen some really dark black ones. And of course, that really bright orange up there. But as you see up here on the right, they do this in 1927. So they reorg this company, rolls out in 1927. But it didn't see a lot of success. And the Bernheims are all about success. And so in 1929, after a couple years, Lynn decides he's done. And so he sells his interest back to Brockman, back to Bauer's daughter, and puts the company back in the hands of the family. And so they continue on. You can see here very bright colors. They get into more of those turquoise and yellow colors. And they did extremely well out west. Out west is their market. The collectors of this latter reorg stuff are very much into it. But the big thing here in the East is Fiesta ware. So Fiesta ware starts in 1936, and you know, I don't know who took from who, but a lot of similarities there in the colors, even in some of the advertisements stuff. But the Fiesta Ware Company was in West Virginia, very much here in the East, and kind of had an impact on J.A. Bauer Pottery, dining ware back west. And so eventually, in 1962, they close. And so when I was looking through the papers to get some of this stuff, these advertisements were everywhere in the LA papers, where they were that these stores that sold the pottery was like, hey, come and get this stuff. You're not going to get it ever again. Like, it's done. Like, come and get our stock. This is your chance. And you can, you know, the Fiesta ware is still extremely out there, extremely important. You know, if that company was to close, a lot of people would rush to go buy what they had. So I kind of thought that was interesting there, where it says in big bold letters, "They will be no more." And so that brings us to the modern age. And so 1998, this man named Janek Boniecki gets involved as a collector of pottery. He's a potter himself, and he really gets intrigued by this story. So he tracks down, I don't know if he tracked down the family or whoever owned the trademark, but he buys it. He buys the name. And he starts recreating some of these. I don't know if he used new molds inspired by vintage pieces or if he actually tracked down the original molds. But he introduces this new line in 2000. So this is a revival line that you can still get. The company's still out there. They have a website I'll put up here in a second. Very active on social media. They have all sorts of posts. You look on the bottom of it, and it still has that same branding that I showed you earlier when they moved to California. Here's some of the ones I've pulled from their Facebook of some of the different things. They also collaborate with other potters. They have lines where they'll bring in a famous potter and let them use their studio, and then they'll release it together. If you're a Tinky mug collector, they have a very nice line of Tinky mugs. And so I encourage you guys to check them out. It's like, what a cool story that this stuff's still around. Unfortunately, none of it's in our area. It's an online only, but there is a wholesale application on their website if you own a store and you're interested in maybe bringing this back into our area. It's pretty neat stuff, but you can get it at their website, or they have a showroom that you can actually go into, and those were some of the pictures there. But so, going back to what I said at the beginning, what's Paducah's place at the table? And I love stories, to research stories about that kind of hit that big vein, that bigger America story. So I was really excited when I got into this one and started learning more about it, that like, hey, this stuff is still out there on people's tables and they probably have no clue. And there's no telling how many people, may have some of this later stuff and don't know that Paducah connection. Oh, thank you.